Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic show. This is episode 544. We've got a returning guest, a friend of the show, somebody that I follow myself. We got Joe Casabona with us. We're going to be talking about all things around podcasting. He's just published a book. He's a WordPress developer, educator, podcaster, a video maker. The list just goes on and on and on, viewers. So, Joe, sorry I totally destroyed your surname, but I do that literally to every guest that comes on the show. So don't take it too personally. It's a total failing of mine. But would you quickly introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, no problem there. Teaching in the classroom, I would have to say many surnames out loud without first having the ability to ask them. So no worries there. So as you said, my name is Joe Casabona. I do maybe too much, but my primary focuses are
only a little bit, Joe.
Only a little bit, yeah. My focuses are on podcasting. I work a lot in the WordPress space, teaching how to build websites, both with and without code. And I create online courses and videos. Actually, this year I told myself there's I don't know if you've heard of the yearly theme. This was started by or maybe popularized by CGP Grey and Mike Hurley over at the Cortex podcast. But my theme of this year was the year of consistency. And I wanted to be consistent with putting out content. So I think every week this year I've done a blog post, a podcast episode, and a YouTube video. And the YouTube video is challenging, but yeah. So I guess to sum up everything I do, I create content.
And it's good content. I listen to your podcast. I watch your videos. You're doing a great job. So over to my co-host, Stephen. Stephen, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to listeners and viewers?
Yeah, my name's Stephen from zipfish.io. We make WordPress fast by not only optimizing the servers that your WordPress site runs on, but also the code that powers the site itself.
That's great. And before we go into the main part of the interview, I just want to mention one of our great sponsors, and that's Kinsta. Kinsta Hosting. Kinsta's been the major sponsor of the show for now over 2 years. They've been great to work with. They're a great hosting provider that only specialize in WordPress hosting. If you've got a WooCommerce site for yourself or for a client, a learning management system, anything that needs extra power and resources, go over to Kinsta. They offer really premier WordPress hosting, support, technology, the whole stack. So go over to Kinsta, tell them that you heard about them on the WP-Tonic show. Have a look at their packages, and I suggest that you should buy one for yourself or for your clients. So let's go on to it. So we were discussing some of the main, because obviously Joe does so much in it, so many parts to Joe's activities. So we were discussing which bits we were going to discuss during the show, and we decided we'd start off with podcasting. So you've been doing some videos around podcasting. I mentioned one of them that I've watched recently myself, and you've been delving into the mechanics and that. So are there any tips and insights that you would like to start off with around podcasting you would like to share with the listeners and viewers?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the first thing, obviously people who are listening to this know what a podcast is, but the last set of statistics that we had, at least in America, just over half of Americans know what a podcast is and listen. So the first thing I would say is that to those who listen to podcasts, it seems like podcasting is a saturated space. Like there are so many, but the statistic that I like to throw out there is there are 31 million YouTube channels, and there are less than 1 million active podcasts. So if you are thinking about starting a podcast, I would say now you're still getting in early. Now is a great time to do it because it's easier than ever, and there are lots of resources to help you start a podcast.
Well, it's funny because I was also looking at the facts around YouTube, and I just want to put this statement to you, see if you, before I hand it over to Stephen, is Now, obviously, Google makes money from monetization. They will only allow you to monetize your site until you get 5,000 subscribers to your YouTube channel. They don't publicly say this. This is coming from me, basically. I think the struggle is to get to that 5,000 mark where you can monetize the videos, because that's when Google is actually probably going to share your videos a bit more. And if you've got consistency and all the other things, you probably then start to get some traction. But it's that slog to get to that 5,000 mark. Would you agree with what I just said, Joe?
Yeah, let me tell you, I had less of a hard time building a following for my podcast than I did for YouTube, because YouTube is tough. You got to figure out what people actually want to watch. You got to figure out the YouTube algorithm and how they're sharing things. And yeah, you got to get to that subscriber mark if you want to throw ads there. So it's some combination, because I've been watching my when can I monetize dial go up. But it's some combination of number of subscribers plus public watch hours. So it's not just like there.
Yeah, it's a combination. Sorry,
Right.
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah. So it's like you get some number of subscribers, but you could buy those subscribers, I guess. But they want to make sure people actually want to watch your content before they're throwing ads on there, which I think is interesting, because I suspect they're more stringent about who can monetize than who can pay them to throw ads up there. Sorry, Google, don't be mad at me. Please monetize my videos.
Please, sir. Can I have some more? Can you monetize my videos, sir? Please. It is like Oliver Twist. Aren't we living in an age of Dickens, aren't we, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I shared something with my newsletter about Google changing their algorithm a little bit to focus on blocks of content, right? So like snippets of content that answer specific questions, so that they can just show them on the search page. And as much as I dislike that, because they're taking traffic away from the websites, I'm going to do it, because it's their game. It's their playground, So I thought that was interesting. I'm like, I don't like this, but I'm going to do it because I want to show up in Google.
Yeah. Over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, you got to play their game no matter what. Like, it's either play their game or you're going to get, not ranked as high. And I think like what's interesting is like that dichotomy between me as a user and me as a content creator. Like as a user, love snippets. As a content creator, hate snippets. And it's just interesting, like living in those two worlds. Since you have like, your different channels that you broadcast stuff out to, your YouTube and your podcast and your email newsletter and the various sites that you run, how much do you tailor the content specifically to that channel versus having a theme that kind of everything unites around?
That's a great question. And for me, it's I basically try to cover the same topics, but I try to do it in a way that is tailored to the medium, right? So for blog posts, for example, if I'm blogging about podcasting, it's going to be more advice driven, right? 4 ways to monetize your podcast, right? With YouTube, it's going to be more visual stuff. So here's how I manage my sponsors, right? And in WordPress, or here's this custom plugin I wrote. And then for the podcast specifically, this is where I probably spend the most time planning my content, right? With the blog and with YouTube, I have an Airtable basically with ideas that I've come up with, and I generally prioritize them based on what I'm trying to promote at that time. But with the podcast, because I try to do things so far in advance, I come up with basically a theme for the next 25 episodes. And generally that's like my season, right? So season 9 right now is how to be consistent with writing content and ideas for content. So if you look back at, the last bunch of episodes, there's some twist around that. Writing content to build your mailing list, or building a resource site. I think I'm spoiling next week's episode. Building a resource site to make money, stuff like that. So, and for the next season, I'm working on kind of how to stay productive while working from home, right? Which is, I didn't think would be timely at this point, but it still is. So, to answer your question around the content I make, I reach out mostly to interviewees or possible guests for my podcast, but I'll also every month or so have a solo episode where I go deep on a topic that's generally, again, related to something I'm trying to promote. So my podcast course, or my Done For You service, or my membership for site builders, whatever course I'm rolling out at that time.
How do you manage all these various different brands that you kind of have? Like, you have the createcourses.com stuff, the How I Built It, your different channels. Like, do you treat this as you are the brand, or do each of these brands have their own sort of kind of entity? I just find it interesting when you have so many things going on. Like, how do you balance that? It's always a really tricky place to be in, I find.
Yeah, and it's something I've really struggled with. I made a decision last year that all of my content would go on Casabona.org, and I would link to these various places, right? So I am the brand. But now I'm rethinking that. I actually hired somebody to help me with a little bit of PR. And so I had to fill out her assessment, and I had to really, I'm like, I'm paying her to do this. I want to make sure I do it right. What do I want to be known for? How do I want to funnel things like that? How do I redo the messaging? And so,
oh dear.
So I've settled on, I still believe I'm the brand for most of these, but now I think I have very clear audiences, right? So for Podcast Liftoff is my signature course and Done For You service. Obviously, it's people who want to start podcasts. Creator Courses, I was like a little bit of a house divided, because I sell all of my courses a la carte, and then I have the membership. But I decided I'm really going to push the membership, which is for site builders or people who want to build websites without knowing a lot of code. So that's where all of my messaging went. I still funnel all of the content through Casabona.org, through various automations and things like that. But I hope that answered your question, because I really do struggle with that. I feel like
I see them as your digital children, yeah. And you're the daddy. You're the daddy, and they're the little children. So they have a lot of your DNA in them, but they're also alive in their own right.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I came to that real.
That was a very iffy way of putting it, wasn't it?
That's all right. They are like my digital children. As someone with actual children, I can say that.
You got a new one, didn't you?
Yeah. He's 3 months old. I guess he's almost 4 months old now. But, yeah, thank you very much. It's a lot of fun. But I came to this realization because I had my podcast course, and then I had the Done For You podcasting service on 2 different sites. Podcast Liftoff, and then shipyourpodcast.com, which I thought was a great brand. And then I thought, why are these 2 different sites? They're basically the same content, and it just depends on what the person wants. So sometimes I'll shoot first and then aim, but I've been trying to be a lot more deliberate about reeling all of that in, so that when I introduce myself, people aren't like, wow, you do a lot. They're like, oh, I understand what you do.
Well, you do a lot. So that's the so are you still actively teaching as well? I know in the corona you're probably not doing it face to face, but are you're still active in the education plus doing all this? Is that correct, Joe?
I have not taught in higher ed in a couple of semesters.
Right.
I want to do that again, probably after the corona stuff is over. Instead, I've focused on developing courses for LinkedIn Learning. So
yes.
So that's where my, I guess, I don't want to say professional teaching, because I teach professionally on my own platform, but my non-Joe Casabona platform teaching. Yes. Is going over to LinkedIn.
So have you been collaborating at all with Morton at all, or have you met him at all? Because he's a personal friend of mine.
Oh yeah, Morton is the one who got me in. I messaged him. This was like a slow play. I messaged him like in like 2016 or 2017. And I was like, how do I teach at LinkedIn Learning? And he was like, you really got to think about what you want to teach. And I'm like, okay. So I let it stew a little bit. And then he made an introduction to his content manager at WordCamp US 2018. And I've been working with them ever since. And it's been, it's improved my personal process, but it's also, that's also a nice, that's a nice way to kind of fence in some of my teaching, right? Because I love teaching programming, but I want creator courses to focus less on programming. I can throw all of my programming courses over to LinkedIn Learning. So like learning PHP is a course I just developed for them. And then kind of like an auxiliary course called PHP for WordPress, where it's like just enough to program on WordPress. And custom post types and advanced custom fields and all sorts of really fun stuff over there. So it's nice. It's that is a very clear audience that I have over there. So I guess ideally what I would do is my students, when they're like ready to start learning programming, I would send them to LinkedIn Learning.
Right, that's a great, fantastic. Yeah, I think you're doing a great job there. And Morton, like I say, Morton's a personal friend of mine, and he's just a great guy. He's one of the top people I know in the WordPress. Well, he's trying to divorce himself a bit from WordPress a bit for understandable reasons, but he's just a fantastic guy. So we're going to go for our break, folks. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Joe's book. Yes, he's written a book. He loves his punishment, this guy. And we'll be talking about some other things. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. Got Joe on the show, friend of the show, does amazing content. I don't know, he does it all. So there we go. I thought I produced. Well, what I like about you is because you're just a machine, and I thought I produced a fair bit of content during the week, but you outdo me. So I'll give you full marks.
Thank you.
And I've also forgotten to plug one of our sponsors. Before we go any further, I want to mention Groundhog. Groundhog is a native CRM system, like ActiveCampaign, Drip. There's a number of them, but they're mostly SaaS-based. This is a native plugin. And if you're looking for a more cost-effective way to do your marketing automation on your WordPress website, have a look at Groundhog. They offer much better value than the leading SaaS competition. So go over to Groundhog, have a look at what they got to offer, tell them that you heard about them on the WP-Tonic show, and buy one of their packages. That really helps the show. So Joe, book. So that's another thing. I can not imagine writing a book, because I suffer from I don't like to use that word, have a little bit of dyslexia. And secondly, I've been told it's painful. It's more painful than pulling teeth, I've been told. So why did you decide to write a book? And it's around coding. Why did you think, you're already doing Linda and that? What did you think people would gain writing this book and producing it, Joe?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, I will put writing a book in the same category as I do running a half marathon, which I've run a couple of, though I don't look like I can do that. Run is generous. Jog is more like it. So doing a half marathon or planning a WordCamp. It is a lot of pain during the process, followed by just like this huge endorphin hit when you finish. So I would categorize the book as the same way. So I've always had aspirations to write a book. I wrote my first one in 2011. It was called Building WordPress Themes from Scratch. That was published by Envato. And the reason I did that is because I learned, I should say, that if you want to get published by a true book publisher, right, you need to have already published a book, which is kind of like saying an entry-level position requires 3 to 5 years experience, right? So I did that book, and then shortly after, I had an idea for a book called Responsive Design for WordPress. And it was a book all about that. I reached out to Peach Pit, who that publisher and their books personally taught me a lot about WordPress and web development, I should say. I'm a web developer because of their books. So I reached out and I said, "Are you interested in this?" They said yes. That book came out in 2013. And then last year, which feels like 100 years ago, in March of 2019, I reached out to my publisher and I said, "Hey, responsive themes with WordPress is like, or responsive design with WordPress is like 6 years old. Maybe we should do like a second edition." And my editor got back to me very candidly and said, "People in the WordPress space don't buy books." And I said, "Understood." And then she said, "But we do have we need a 9th edition of our HTML and CSS book. Are you interested in that? The current author does not want to write that, the 9th edition." And I thought, more basic than WordPress as far as audience appeal goes, right? It's less niched than WordPress is. It's the 9th edition, so it does well. And this has a good opportunity to be taught in the classroom. So I agreed. So I guess to answer that was a very long way to not answer your question.
You're probably aware of some of my questions, though. Stephen is.
The reason I wrote the book is because it is an exercise in authority building, right? Because now my name is on the printed page, which gives me authority that you might not get from just producing your own online courses. It has the ability to be taught in the classroom. I actually taught HTML and CSS in the classroom. So I got to write the book that I would have wanted to use while teaching. And then it's an extra revenue stream, to be frank, right? Like they pay you in advance, and then as long as the book does well, you start to get royalty checks. And as somebody who's self-employed, yeah, I mean, they're very smart, like book publishers, where they'll, they have a big formula. But this book has a lot of appeal that I think actually might give me the opportunity to have royalties come in. And as somebody who's self-employed, having a diverse set of income streams is super important. And I'll just say one more thing. When the responsive design for WordPress book came out, that endorphin hit was like recurring, because I would go to WordCamps and I would meet people who were like, "I read your book and it's so great." And I'm like, "Oh, this is really nice." And I fail horribly when people rain comments on me, but or compliments on me. But it's a really good feeling to know that something that I put so much time and effort into has had a positive impact on somebody.
Was it a very extensive proofreading? What's the proofreading process? Because I've been told, especially a technical book, especially around coding, I've been told by other people that have published books in that particular area that's painful in its own right.
Yeah. So here's how the process works. High level overview. I write the outline, and then I write a chapter, and that goes to my main copy editor, and he rips it to shreds and then sends it to a technical copy editor. And the particular technical editor I worked with seems to have read the entirety of MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network documentation, because he knew when I stated something incorrectly from those docs. So he would do that. Then it would go back to my copy editor. He would once it over and send it back to me. That was the most frustrating part because, but also I should say frustrating, but important, right? Yeah. Because we restructured chapters and the book is better because of that.
Well, I was a front end developer a few years ago. I haven't actively developed for the past 4 or 5 years. I only dabble on my own website properties. I've got a whole crew that does proper development. But when I was learning, I was learning through books and Linda, but there's nothing worse than you're trying to learn from a book and it's got syntax faults. There's nothing worse, is there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that process, and like I structured things a certain way that were probably better for, say, video, right? But then we wanted to make it more comprehensive and more explanation. And this was for like the beginner. Like we basically assumed that the reader didn't know what a computer was.
I once emailed I won't mention the actual author of a particular popular WordPress development book, and I said, this is full of syntax problems and the code doesn't work. And he said, well, he emailed me back, Jody, said it's part of the learning process.
Okay. Nah. Nope. That was another great thing about my copy editor was he would actually do the code. His job must have been extremely hard because he had to like deal with my grasp of the English language, and then also like write all the code. And he would be like, this is not working for me. And then I'd have to like troubleshoot some of it. But again, that whole process. And then after I did it, he would reread it, rewrite some sections, send it to a second editor, blah, blah, blah. So I think like 4 or 5 other people looked at it by the time it was ready to go to print. And again, it was a long process, but a really important one because I am hoping that I don't, I have an errata page on the website, right? Just corrections. It says this, it should say that. I'm hoping I don't have to do any. I'm hoping I don't have to fill that out at all. So,
oh well, over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, what with all this book writing stuff going on, and like you started with kind of WordPress, and now you've moved a little bit more into just some code stuff, but also like some other ancillary sort of things around that, and around just building podcasts and businesses and stuff. What was your trajectory through all of this? Like, where did you start, and kind of how did you get to where you are now, and what's your vision, and where are you going from there?
Ah, wow. Yeah, that's a great question. So I knew I always was interested in computers from like from a pretty young age. I was interested in my dad's laptop, and then we eventually got a family computer, and I would tinker. And like my first successful side hustle was making mix CDs for people because we had like DSL, so I was able to download music quickly and then burn them on. I also had like one of the first CD burners of people in my age, so I always liked that. And my church reached out to me when I was like 14 or 15. My dad was on the parish council, I think, at that time, but they reached out to me. They're like, Joe, you're good with computers. Can you make us a website? And I was like, I don't know how to make websites. And they said, we'll pay you $200. And I was like, yeah, sure.
I can learn.
I can learn that. Yeah, exactly. So I got a educational version of Microsoft front page. And I made my first.
They were the good old days, weren't they, Joe?
I know. And I loved it. I was like, this, I get to like flex like my more logical side of my brain, but I also get to flex like the creative side of my brain a little bit. And I really loved the process. And so I'm like, I'm going to make a business out of this. And I reached out to everybody I knew who had a business. And I was like, do you need, and this was around like 2000, 2001, I should say. Do you need a website? And people were like, oh yeah, I do. So I'm like, $200. And somebody was like, you don't charge enough. And I was like, $500. And they're like, okay. I had some really good people in my life to make sure that I was charging what I was worth and stuff like that. So I loved it. I went to college for computer science. I learned I was very, very bad at math. And so I picked a major that allowed me to still study computer science. I have my master's in software engineering, but I never took calculus. Yeah, which is like engineering friends are like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I abused the system. I look for shortcuts. Throughout my
funny enough, we got very similar backgrounds because when I did my degree as a mature student, and then I did my master's in interactive design. but my degree was in multimedia and computer science, and I managed to, because I couldn't do calculus.
Yeah.
I just couldn't handle that.
Yeah, it was tough because I dropped the class, but my teacher was such a great teacher, Dr. Anthony Pizzola. He was amazing. If you're listening, Dr. Pizzola. When I dropped the class, I handed him the paperwork and I said, "It's not you, it's me." Like I actually said those words. But since then, I remained self-employed throughout all of grad school and like the first year after grad school, and then I realized I needed insurance, like health insurance. And I got a job at my alma mater in the IT department. And so through there, I worked as a web developer and I taught. And then I got a job at a WordPress agency. And after my daughter was born, I realized that the agency life is a young man's game, somebody without kids, or somebody whose kids are grown, right? But I did not want to have sleepless nights or work and like miss my kid's first word or something like that. So I decided to go the full-time self-employment route. I've been doing that ever since. My plans for the future, I want to get more into content creation. I really want to focus up my offerings because at first I was like, I'll just do anything for anybody who is willing to give me money. And that's a bad spot to be in. I don't want to trade hours for dollars anymore. I have 2 kids now. And with everything going on, my wife is a full-time nurse. So on days that she's at the hospital, I'm not working. I want to make sure that I build a machine that doesn't require me to be there all the time. So my online courses and my membership hopefully will you shouldn't say hope in business. My plan is say by the end of 2021, I'll be fully on this membership and products model, and maybe my wife can drop down part-time. I know she wants to do that. So that's my longest term goal right now.
Oh, they're great reasons to pursue your business, Joe. We're going to wrap up the half hour goes quick, doesn't it? We're going to wrap up the podcast part of the show. Joe's going to stay on for another 12, 15 minutes. We're going to be talking a bit about modern front end development, what you need to know, what skills you need. Joe's a fantastic educator, knows his stuff. It should be a fantastic discussion. You can watch that plus this part of the show, the entirety on the YouTube channel, the WP-Tonic YouTube channel. Go over there, subscribe. Got tons of content on there. Got over, I think, about 550 videos on the WP-Tonic YouTube channel. So go over there, subscribe. So Joe, what's the best places for people to learn more about you and your offerings?
You can go to casabona.org/start. That's casabona.org/start. It kind of breaks up what I do into 3 sections, and then you can continue to pursue the one that interests you most.
That's great. And Stephen, where's the best place to find out more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, head over to zipfish.io and you can learn how we optimize both the server and the code on your sites and make it blazing fast. That's
great. And if you really want to support the show, go over to YouTube and give us a review. That really does help the show. It can be a 2-star, 3-star, whatever you want to give the show. But your feedback and support is much appreciated. We'll be back next week with another fantastic guest like Joe. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye. So on to bonus content. We were discussing an article on the WP-Tonic Roundtable show, which you're coming on in the next couple of weeks, going to be returning. Thank you so much, Joe. And hopefully you, at some stage, you'll be able to join us on a more regular basis on that. You're missed. But we were discussing an article by Chris Coyer on CSS tricks. He wrote a very extensive article about the whole thing of front-end development, and WordPress has been part of this around Gutenberg and React, and the needing to learn React heavily if you wanted to still be a relevant WordPress developer in the next couple of years. But he was talking about the whole, how it's become just too complicated, and it's actually, he thinks he's removing some of the joy that he had when he discovered CSS and rapidly became a guru after a couple of years hard work and that. And Chris has been on the show, and I know Chris as a friend, and he's a bit like Morton. He's one of the greatest people I know in the industry, a great educator and just a great guy. Do you think he's right that it's all got a bit over the top in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. I consider myself a front-end developer, and I don't know React. I've always taken a very I will learn what I need to learn when I need to learn it approach, right? Because I mean, even before React, every week it seems somebody's like, hey, have you seen Ionic? Have you seen Angular? Have you seen whatever? I'm like, I guess, like, what do I need this for, right? It took me a long time to finally learn Sass, and I'm so happy I learned Sass because it's incredible. But you know, we were talking on the main show about how I made my first website with Front Page, and I would do something in Front Page and I would look at the source code it generated. And if I wanted to figure out how to do something, I could just look at someone's website and see how they did it. Actually, one of the iterations of my freelance website was a version heavily influenced by Alex King.
That's a good way of putting it. It's heavily influenced. You've got some great terms, Joe. You've got some great, very much more diplomatic than me. I'm not very diplomatic. So,
as an Italian, we're very well versed in doublespeak. But today it's like I wrote this book on HTML and CSS, and I'm like, these are still the fundamentals. Like, you should still, if you want to make websites, you should still know and understand these things. But I remember I was like setting up I was setting up a WordPress theme, and it was like, install Composer, install Grunt, homebrew this, then that, then run the config file. And if this breaks, and I'm like, why does this need to break?
Morton said to me a couple of weeks ago, he came back on the show a couple of weeks ago. He was a regular on our round table, but he needed to take a break, and hopefully in the new year he's going to be coming back more regularly. But he came on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he said sometimes these development environments take longer to set up and configure than actually making the website.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When I was at Crowd Favorite, I was asked to evaluate this theme, and then I was asked by my team lead, like, what do you think? And I was like, I think that is way too much work to set up a theme that we're going to develop on. Like, it shouldn't take me 10 minutes to get the theme ready to install. Like, if it's just HTML and CSS and some JavaScript and PHP, I don't understand why I need to do this insane handshake. I'll never forget. There was no comma in what I just said there. I will never forget, Pippin Williamson came on my show early on. I think he kicked off season 2 a couple years ago. And I asked him what his development environment was like. And he said, if my laptop fell into a lake, I would want to be able to go to the Apple store, buy a new laptop, and have my whole environment up and running again in an hour. So he keeps it pretty Spartan, right? He doesn't have all these homebrew, Composer, Grunt, Gulp. I don't even know. Are those still the ones?
Maybe I'm old. I am old. I'm 57 now, so I'm just looking for death to come round. It's just who thinks of these names, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and so I don't even know if those are the latest ones to use anymore. But I think when I was in high school, I had a history teacher named Mr. Turner, and he always talked about Hammurabi and Hammurabi's code, and how he wanted to keep it simple, stupid, right? So like, if you steal something, I cut off your hand, right? Like, very, very clear rules. Front end development, web development should be the same. This is like WordPress too, right? Because if you want to contribute to core, it's a multi-step process to get everything up and running. I can't just like open up core and whatever.
Oh no, if you want to go there, but lots of people said, it's a bit of a. Let's try and utilize language that you would use. It needs a little bit of work, really. The actual, doesn't it?
Yeah, it needs to. I understand why certain tools exist, especially on a project as big as WordPress.
Yeah, true.
However, if we want more people to contribute, the barrier for entry needs to be lower. And that is I'm not saying it's an easy solution. It's a hard question that needs to be thought about, but that's across all of front end development, right? Last year I was working on a project and we were working in a WordPress theme and somebody was like, we should do this in Gatsby. And I'm like, why? Like, are you just saying that because that's the new shiny? Well, I mean, yes.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
There was no reason for us to do it in Gatsby, and ultimately we didn't because we didn't.
I think it's partly. I'm going to obviously bring Stephen into this, but he knows a lot more because he's an active front end developer. But I also think kind of the WordPress themes. You got the if you're working for an agency. Yeah, but there's a lot of self-employment involved in this, where the more kind of JavaScript, React, it's about learning skills that could get you that really nice job with Google or Facebook on 150,000 plus bonus job. So there's almost like two worlds, isn't there? The get that tech job with a Fortune 500 company, and then there's the whole world of self-employment and agencies, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a stat right on the Chris Collier article that's like 5% of websites use React and 85% use jQuery, but 85% of jobs are React. I recommended that somebody learn jQuery, and another developer was like, why would you do that? And I'm like, because it's still used like everywhere, and it's like a great way. It's a great way to learn JavaScript. You download the jQuery file and you do stuff. I don't need to run a command line anything like I need to with React. It's not to knock React. I'm sure it's wonderful, but if we want more people,
I've had a good go at it, but I'm going to throw you. I've got another question, but I want to bring Stephen in. You got a question, Stephen?
No, I'm hearing what you guys are saying. Just love sitting back here listening. But what you're saying with React and jQuery and all of that, like, really resonates with me. Like, when I started development, right, I didn't really learn that much JavaScript. I knew just enough JavaScript to start how to like get jQuery to run. But then that's easier, right? So it's easier to do like a jQuery thing to change some class or some style or add a DOM element or whatever. And then if you want to move to something more complex, like straight vanilla JavaScript or whatever, you have like this point to ask a question, like, how do I do this in jQuery? How do I do that in JavaScript? And all of a sudden I have the vocabulary to use because I learned it in this entry point. But if you hop straight to something like React, which can have layers and layers on top of itself on how it works, the vocabulary you have to learn so much base knowledge before you have any sort of vocabulary to say, hey, how do I do X, Y, or Z? That, like, exactly what you were saying, that it's a barrier to entry and it's hard to work. And one thing will hopefully be as complex as it needs to be. And I think that that goes throughout life. We all like making life more complex than it has to be.
Now, what's your Spencer Forum remarked on our show, the Roundtable show last week, that he was looking at Gutenberg more intently. So he's been playing around with it, and he said he found bits of it still pretty buggy, and it was using JSON files to actually produce the code. And I found that interesting because I've kept away from it. We've had 2 projects where the client insisted the site be built on Gutenberg. The other ones we've been using Elementor, which has got its own problems in some ways, but nothing's perfect, isn't it? But how do you, what's your own, I don't even know if you want to go down this road. You might say you might not want to, but how do you see, how Gutenberg has been using React? And yeah, let's start with there. What was your own views about it?
Yeah. So
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you
yeah,
want to be fair, don't you?
right. It's a tough question. I think that, years before Gutenberg, right, when WordPress was mostly Backbone JS, there was the thought that it was like 70% PHP and 30% JavaScript, and that would flip in the coming years. I think that there are ways to, I've used like advanced custom fields to build blocks without needing to know React, but they probably only get you so far. I wasn't there when the decision was made, aside from like the blog posts, the blog posts, right? I don't have words to be diplomatic there, so I'll just say the blog posts.
Yeah.
And so hopefully it's the best tool for the job. It rolled out so quickly. And part of that is because, right, that's like Automatic's credo, right? Move fast and break things or whatever. Maybe it's like always ship, but I feel like it was always like, we got to ship something every day. Let's do it fast and then we'll fix it. So I can't speak to the code base. And I understand to an extent why they might want to use JavaScript, right? Because you have that more seamless experience where you change something in the admin and it's updated in real time in the editor, right? Like, so for example, I was working with this block, a podcast block, and I checked or unchecked something and it changed immediately. That's a lot easier to do.
Yeah, it's nice, isn't it?
In JavaScript, and probably React is a very event-based language, so perhaps that was the right choice. But again, we want to make sure that however we're doing things, we can onboard new developers easily, right? So like, when it comes to setting up React, there was a whole big complicated mess of things you needed to do where you needed to run a bunch of things from the command line. And then I think it was I want to say Joe McGill, but it might be a different Joe, and I'm really sorry. Pointed out that there was like this new thing that you didn't, like a new way to create a React project where you didn't need to do all the hand wavy command line stuff. So I guess I don't know if I've answered your question, but if we're going to continue,
I think because it was a very difficult question to answer really, and I think you've given it a pretty good go, because it was a pretty fucked up question. We can't say you dealt with it with what the best way you could deal with it if I was in your shoes. But it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one to handle because you could throw the whole. It has been a difficult project, hasn't it? But in fairness, it was going to be difficult. I think the way it was handled and the communication and other parts were extremely regrettable, and it made a difficult process even more difficult. I think that's the fairest way you could put it, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's one thing to want to roll this out because you're excited about it. But it's another thing to just roll it out because you want it to be out right now, right? When you're saying a platform like WordPress, which runs 30-something% of the internet, you can't brag about how great it is that so many people use it and then roll things out like no one's using it.
I find it a little bit schizo though, because it was rolled out like with the utmost haste, and then the process of getting it to become a really stable, mature environment, it seems to me, but it's all right for me to say this, what do I know? I'm not involved in it. I don't contribute it. So, but I've got to say, as a kind of semi outsider, but passionate about it in some ways, it seems it seems to have become a very painful, slow process, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, we need to be patient, right? When I worked in higher ed, we heard about a new update to a system that we were using called Luminous, and they had like a 5-year plan to roll it out because the enterprise moves very slowly and they need to test things in a bunch of different cases. And I said this to Matt, like we spoke on the phone right before the State of the Word where he announced 5.0 was out, and I said, if you want the enterprise to take us seriously, and you will need to if you want to reach 50% of the web, you need to do things more slowly. You need to give them more than 5 days notice. Give them 5 months notice.
Well, I think we're going to.
But
I think that was an excellent point. We're going to wrap up the discussion now. Joe, thanks for being such a great guest. You're going to have to come back. Well, you're coming back for the roundtable show, but you're going to have to come back in the new year for the main interview show. I think it's been a great discussion. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well. We'll see you soon, folks, and hope we'll have another great guest for next week. See you soon. Bye.
thanks
Bye.
so much.